The night never truly ended in the trenches, even when the sky lightened. Darkness remained in the men's eyes. Dawn arrived quietly, slipping through clouds of smoke and mist, revealing a battlefield that looked less like land and more like a wound carved into the earth. Mud filled everything. Boots, rifles, letters from home, bodies. The trench walls sagged as if they were tired of holding themselves up, and the smell of rot clung to the air like it had chosen to stay forever. Private Thomas Hale had stopped counting the days since he arrived at the front. Time no longer moved forward here. It circled endlessly, measured only by shelling and silence. He stood with his back pressed to the trench wall, fingers numb, listening to the distant thunder of artillery. Every explosion made the ground tremble, and with it his chest tightened, waiting for the next one to land closer. Rats scurried freely, bold and well-fed. They crawled over sleeping men and gnawed at corpses that lay half-buried in the mud. Between the lines, Thomas had tried to chase them away once, swinging his rifle wildly, but the effort felt pointless. The rats always returned. They had learned what the war provided. The order came suddenly, passed down the trench in low voices. An attack was coming. Not theirs. The enemy's. Helmets were pulled tighter. Rifles were checked. Hands shook as men fixed bayonets, pretending they were not afraid. Thomas swallowed hard and stared at the muddy parapet ahead of him, knowing that in minutes everything would turn violent. The first shells landed behind them, then in front, then everywhere. The sky screamed as artillery tore it apart. Dirt rained down, burying men alive. Thomas dropped to the ground as the trench wall collapsed nearby, crushing someone beneath it. The screams lasted only a moment before being swallowed by the noise. When the barrage lifted, there was a pause, a terrifying pause. Then whistles blew. Figures rose from the opposite trench and began running forward, stumbling through mud and wire. Thomas fired until his rifle kicked back uselessly, empty. He barely remembered pulling the trigger. Smoke and screams blurred together. Men fell and did not get up. Others kept running even when they were wounded, driven forward by something stronger than fear. The attack failed. They always did. When it was over, the ground between the trenches was littered with bodies, twisted and broken. Some still moved, calling for help, but no one went to them. Daylight meant death. Thomas leaned against the trench wall and slid down into the mud, his hands stained dark. He could not remember the faces of the men he had shot. He hoped he never would. That night, gas rolled in. At first, it looked harmless, like fog creeping low across the ground. Then someone screamed. Masks were grabbed in panic. Thomas fumbled with his hands slippery with sweat. He pulled it over his face just as his lungs began to burn. Through the glass lenses, the world turned green and unreal. Men who failed to seal their masks collapsed, clawing at their throats, coughing blood. The gas drifted on, slow and patient, as if it knew it had all the time in the world. Morning revealed what the night had taken. The dead were stacked along the trench, waiting to be buried when it was safe. Some had been there for days already. Thomas tried not to look at their faces, but they haunted him anyway. He wrote a letter home, telling his mother he was fine, that the war would end soon. He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket, knowing he might never send it. Weeks passed, or months. It was impossible to tell. Rumors traveled faster than bullets. They spoke of massive battles elsewhere, of entire towns erased, of armies advancing only to be pushed back again. They said Russia was collapsing, that men were deserting in thousands. They said the war would end any day now. They always said that. One morning, Thomas was ordered over the top. This time, it was their attack. The whistle blew, sharp and final. He climbed the ladder and stepped into open ground. The mud sucked at his boots, trying to pull him down. Machine gun fire tore through the air, snapping past his ears. Men fell around him. Some screamed, some didn't. He ran because stopping meant dying. A shell exploded nearby, throwing him into the ground. His ears rang. The world spun. When he tried to stand, his leg refused to move. Pain surged through him. He looked down and saw blood soaking into the mud. He lay there, staring at the sky, waiting for the next shell to finish the job. But it didn't. Hours later, Darkness fell and stretcher bearers crawled out to collect the wounded. Thomas was dragged back to the trench, barely conscious. He woke in a field hospital, surrounded by moans and the smell of antiseptic mixed with decay. Surgeons worked without rest, sawing, stitching, amputating. There was no time for gentleness. His leg was saved, but he would never walk the same again. While Thomas lay recovering, the war dragged on without him. New offensives, new weapons, new graves. In 1917, the world shifted again. Across the ocean, the United States joined the fight. Fresh troops arrived with clean uniforms and hopeful faces, unaware of what waited for them. Veterans watched silently, knowing those expressions would not last. Back home, nations were cracking under the strain. Food was scarce. Families mourned sons who would never return. In Russia, anger boiled over into revolution. Soldiers dropped their rifles and went home. An empire collapsed. By 1918, everyone was exhausted. Germany made one final push, throwing everything it had into a desperate gamble. At first, it worked. Then it failed. Allied forces pushed back harder, supported by American troops and tanks that crushed barbed wire like it wasn't there. Slowly, painfully, the front began to move. When the armistice was announced, Thomas was sitting outside a hospital tent, staring at the sky. He heard church bells ringing in the distance. Men cheered. Some laughed. Some cried. He felt nothing at first. Then relief washed over him, followed by something heavier. Guilt. He had survived. Millions had not. When he finally returned home, the streets were quiet. The celebration felt forced. He saw empty chairs at dinner tables, crutches on sidewalks, eyes that stared too long at nothing. The war had ended, but it had followed them home. Thomas sometimes woke at night, gasping for air, the sound of artillery still echoing in his ears. He wondered what it had all been for. The land gained meant nothing to him. The victories felt hollow. He knew, deep down, that something unfinished remained. The world spoke of peace, but it was a fragile thing stitched together poorly, ready to tear apart again. And somewhere in the ruins of Europe, new anger was growing.